In a small village cradled by quiet hills and wrapped in the scent of jasmine fields, there lived a cat with eyes like fading stars. Her name was Luma. No one knew where she came from. One day she appeared thin, quiet, and strange. Her fur was the color of old moonlight, pale and silvery, as if the moon itself had wept and formed her. The villagers soon noticed something odd. Every night, when the moon rose high and clear, Luma would walk silently through the cobbled streets to the village square. She would sit in the same spot, near the old well, lift her head to the sky, and let out a single heart-wrenching meow. One meow. Then she would stay there, staring at the moon, unmoving until dawn. At first, people thought it was charming, even mystical. Children would follow her, trying to imitate her cry. Elders whispered about omens and old souls. But as time passed, fascination turned to unease. Why did she cry at the moon? What was she waiting for? And what was this promise no one knew of but her? Mara, a gentle old woman who lived near the square, began leaving food and water for Luma. She spoke softly to her, sitting beside her some nights. "What are you remembering, my dear?" she would ask, as the cat meowed and stared upward. Luma never looked at her, never responded, except once. One cold night, as Amara reached to pet her, Luma turned and pressed her head softly against Amara's palm, then returned to gazing at the moon. Amara began to feel a strange sadness when she looked at Luma. It was the kind of sorrow one feels when looking at someone who has waited too long. Amara herself had lost her husband decades ago, and her daughter had moved far away. She understood longing. She recognized grief. But the weight in Luma's silence, it was heavier than anything she had known. Rumors began to swirl. "She was once a girl," said little Mina, who swore she saw Luma vanish into mist once. "She waits for someone who died," said the old baker. "She's cursed," whispered others. "Maybe she did something wrong in a past life." But none dared interfere. They watched from behind curtains as Luma made her silent nightly journey, meowed to the moon, and waited. Then one night the moon didn't rise. Storm had gathered, dark and angry, hiding the sky. Rain poured, wind howled, and thunder cracked through the heavens. That night, Luma did not cry. She sat drenched, still facing the sky, soaked to her bones. And yet she waited. Amara opened her door and stepped into the storm, calling out to her, "Come inside, little one, you'll freeze." But Luma did not move. She simply blinked and let the wind blow through her trembling body. Something in Amara's chest cracked that night. She ran to Luma, picked up her frail, wet form, and brought her inside. Luma did not resist. For the first time, she allowed herself to be carried, and that too by Amara's fragile arms. Inside, Amara dried her off gently, wrapped her in a soft woolen shawl, and set her near the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside something else stirred an old memory. Luma opened her eyes and looked around the room. Then her gaze stopped on a painting hanging by the fire. It was faded but still beautiful, a young girl holding a kitten with silvery fur. Amara followed her gaze, her eyes filled with tears. "That's my daughter, Inya. And that was you, wasn't it?" Luma blinked. Maina found a kitten under the moonlight the night before she left. She swore the cat had followed her from her dreams. Voice trembled. You're her, aren't you?" The wind outside softened. The fire crackled softly. And Luma, for the first time, curled up in peace. But peace is fragile. The next morning, Luma was gone. Amara searched the square, the hills, the fields, but she was nowhere to be found. The villagers thought she'd left, but Amara knew Luma hadn't left. She was waiting again. Somewhere else, the next full moon, Amara found her again sitting on the highest hill outside the village, where Inaya once played as a child. She was meowing again, just once at the moon. That night, Amara brought candles and lit them around her. "Ouch." She sat with her and whispered, "I will help you keep your promise, my child, whatever it is." And so began the nights of remembrance. Each full moon, Amara and Luma sat on that hill, silent together under the stars. The villagers began to join them, one by one. Some brought flowers. Others brought memories. Slowly it became a ritual. But no one knew what promise Luma was trying to keep until the letter came. A letter that changed everything. It arrived with no name, no return address. Just a sealed envelope and a familiar handwriting. Amara opened it with trembling hands. I hope she's still waiting. That one sentence was enough to still her heart. It was from Anaya. The next lines read, I'm coming back. I remember. What I promised I never forgot. I just couldn't face it. But I'm ready now, please. If she's still waiting, tell her I'm sorry. Amara's heart burst into a million aching pieces. She read the letter over and over. Luma had remembered. All this time she had remembered. But what was the promise? The answer would arrive the next night. That full moon, Luma did not sit alone. A figure appeared at the edge of the hill. A woman, with the same eyes as the child in the painting, stepped into the circle of candles. Inya had returned. And when Luma saw her, she did not meow. She ran no, flew into her arms. And in that embrace, the moon seemed to pause in the sky. Amara wept. The villagers wept. And Luma for the first time purred. That night no one asked questions. No one needed answers. But the truth, the whole truth, would come with the sunrise. And it would not be easy, because promises kept sometimes carry pain deeper than any wound. And Luma, she'd waited not just for a person, but for a memory to be. The village was still sleeping when the moon faded into dawn. But on the hill where Luma had waited for years, life had returned to something sacred. Luma curled herself on Anaya's lap, eyes closed, heart calm, as though the world had finally made sense. Inaya held her gently, fingers buried in that familiar silvery fur. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything: regret, guilt, love, and above all, the weight of something unspoken for far too long. Amara stood a few feet away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She had never thought she'd see her daughter again. Had buried that hope deep inside long ago. Now, the sight of Inya alive, broken but breathing, was almost too much to bear. They sat together on the hill for hours. As the sun rose higher, the wind shifted. Birds chirped gently as if cautious not to break the fragile peace. Eventually, Inya broke the silence. She remembered. Amara nodded. Yes, every night. I thought I could forget, Inya whispered, but she didn't let me. Luma opened her eyes and looked up at her. For the first time in years, there was no sorrow in them, just stillness. Amara walked closer and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. What happened, Inya? What was the promise? Ina exhaled sharply, the kind of breath that carried 1,000 moments. Looked toward the horizon, eyes distant. I was 17. The night before I left for university, I went to the hill. I took Luma with me. I told her everything, my fears, my excitement, and my plans to leave behind the memories of this place. It wasn't that I didn't love home. I just felt trapped. Amara listened in silence. I told her I would come back one day, that no matter where life took me, I would return. And I looked at the moon and whispered, wait for me, Luma. Every full moon, I'll be thinking of you. I thought it was a small thing, a sweet moment, a goodbye. Her voice cracked. But then I left, and I didn't come back, not for years, not even when you got sick, Mama. I thought if I stayed away, I could outrun everything, the grief, the guilt, the shame. But Luma didn't forget. She held on to that moment like it was a vow. When I tried to bury my past, she reminded me with every letter you sent about Hura, about the cat who cried at the moon. Amara reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. She kept your memory alive. Ow! I didn't deserve that, Inya whispered. I left her. I left you. Amara's voice was soft, like rain on dry soil. But you came back. Luma rubbed her head against Yanaya's chin, then turned and began walking down the hill slowly, but with purpose. She didn't look back, and they followed her. Down the winding path through the village, across the silent square, to the old house. Inaya had once called home. It had changed little-aged wood. Climbing vines, the old swing still hanging from the tree in the yard. But something inside had shifted. The house breathed differently now. It was no longer a memory frozen in time. It had begun to wake up. Inside, Luma leapt onto the windowsill where the moonlight always spilled in at night. She sat there regal and calm and closed her eyes. Inaya touched everything gently. The books, the worn couch, the chipped plates, her mother's knitting needles still resting in their basket. "It's like nothing moved without me," she said softly. "That's because nothing truly did," Amara replied. "We waited. She waited. The days passed slowly. Inaya stayed. She took long walks with her mother. She explored the fields again. Every night she sat with Luma as the moon rose, whispering apologies and stories into the wind. She told Luma about the city, the mistakes, the lost years. She cried into her fur, laughed at memories, and held her close like a friend she'd betrayed, but who forgave her without condition. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky with amber hues, Inaya sat on the porch with Amara. Luma lay stretched at their feet. "I don't know how she survived all these years." "She didn't just survive," Amara said, brushing a hand through Luma's fur. "She kept you alive in her heart. She believed in your return even when I didn't." Inaya turned her eyes toward the horizon. "She believed in a version of me I wasn't sure existed anymore." "Sometimes," Amara said, "it takes someone else's faith to remind us of who we are." That night, something changed again. As the full moon climbed into the sky, Luma stood up and meowed once, just once, like always. But then she walked to Inaya and rubbed against her leg before lying down and closing her eyes. Inaya smiled and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The days grew colder. Autumn leaves danced in the wind, and though the village remained quiet, there was warmth in the air anew, almost sacred. But one morning Amara found Luma sleeping in her usual spot by the window. Only this time, she didn't wake. Her body was still warm, but her breath had stopped. Inaya knelt beside her, gently placing her hand on Luma's side. She didn't cry. Not at first. She simply sat there, stroking her fur, whispering "thank you" over and over again. The village mourned in silence. They all came to say goodbye to the cat who had taught them the weight of waiting, the strength of loyalty, and the pain and beauty of promises kept. They buried Luma on the hill under the tree where she used to sit. A small stone marked her grave. On it, Inaya engraved, "She waited for the moon, and I found my way home." That night, as the moon rose high, Inaya sat alone under its light. No crying echoed across the hill. Just the wind, the stars, and the quiet heartbeat of memory. But, deep in her heart, she heard Luma's final meow. It wasn't a cry of sorrow. It was a farewell. The village changed after Luma's passing, not in the way cities shift or roads vanish, but in the way silence settles in the corners of familiar places. People still walked the same streets. Children still played. Farmers still worked the land. But there was a quietness, an invisible gap where something sacred once lived. For Inaya, the loss of Luma was more than the passing of a beloved companion. It felt like the end of a chapter that had kept her soul anchored to something pure. For so long, Luma had held her story, her sins, her dreams, her return. And now that Luma was gone, Inaya felt unmoored, drifting in memories. She stayed in the village, not out of guilt, but from a feeling she couldn't name. Every day, she woke up in her childhood room, touched the edges of old picture frames, and tried to trace the version of herself that Luma had waited for. Amara watched her, daughter quietly. She didn't ask her to leave. She didn't ask her to stay. She simply existed beside her, sharing morning tea, collecting herbs, listening to the songs of wind chimes hanging outside the porch. One evening, as golden light spilled across the horizon, Inaya climbed the hill alone. She sat by Luma's grave, ran her fingers across the engraved stone, and whispered, "I still don't know how to live without you." She closed her eyes, and in that stillness, Something stirred, not a voice, not a vision, but a memory. A memory that had been buried deep, pushed down beneath years of forgetting. The day before she had left for university, Luma had followed her to the top of the hill, and Inia, young and brimming with dreams, leaned toward her and said, "If I ever forget who I am, will you remind me? Just meow at the moon, I'll know it's you." It hadn't been just a promise from Luma to wait. It had been a plea from Inia to not be forgotten by herself. Tears fell freely now, soaking the earth. "I was so afraid of becoming someone I hated," she whispered. "And I did." The wind rustled the trees gently, as if trying to hold her words. "But you kept reminding me, even when I didn't want to listen." The sky turned silver with moonlight. Inewaya lay down on the grass and looked up, heart aching. And for the first time since Luma's passing, she smiled, because somewhere in the shimmer of stars, she felt seen. The next day, Inia walked into the village school and asked if they needed help. The head-taker, kind old man with a crooked smile, welcomed her immediately. "You used to be the best reader in your class," he said. "We still have your books." She laughed softly. "I think I remember some of them." So she stayed. She read stories to children, taught them to write, and watched their eyes light up like hers once did. She painted the school walls with stars, moons, and silver cats. She told stories not about cities or careers, but about home, love, and the animals that teach us how to return. The villagers embraced her like a long-lost song. They didn't ask for explanations. They didn't reopen old wounds. They simply listened and welcomed her as if she had never left. In each full moon, Inia climbed the hill with a lantern and a blanket. She would sit beside Luma's grave, open a book, and read aloud. One night, as she read, a tiny shadow emerged from the trees. Kitten, small, scruffy, with mismatched eyes, one green, one pale blue. It meowed once. Inia blinked. The kitten walked toward her and curled into her lap. "Where did you come from?" she asked, stunned. The kitten purred, pressing its head into her hand. That night, Inia named her Mira, and suddenly the nights didn't feel so empty. Mira began to follow her everywhere. To the school, to the market, even to the stream where she washed clothes. She was wild but gentle, playful but quiet, so much like Luma. And yet not. But the strangest part was her gaze. She would sometimes stare at Inia for long minutes, unmoving as though studying her, not with curiosity, but with recognition. One evening, as Inia brushed Mira's fur, she said, "Did she send you?" Mira blinked slowly, then nestled closer. Inia smiled. "You don't have to answer. I already know." Seasons passed. The hills turned gold, then white, then green again. Children grew. Trees bloomed. And Inia became a part of the village, heartbeat once more. But the past has a way of echoing back even through peace. One morning, a stranger arrived. A young man in his 30s, backpack slung over his shoulder, walking with hesitation. Approached Inia while she was watering herbs outside her house. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for someone who once lived here." She stood up, curious. "You found her," he paused, then pulled something from his bag. A small, worn-out notebook. I think this belongs to you." She took it slowly, opened the first page, and gasped. It was her journal, one she had lost during her first year at university. Pages filled with confusion, pain, and longing. Drawings of Luma, of the moon, of home. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "I work at a bookstore in the city," he said. "It was tucked between old volumes. No one knows how it got there. When I opened it, your name was written on the last page. And below it, in her own handwriting, 'If someone finds this, tell her I'm trying to come back. Tell her I miss her.'" Nia sat down, heart pounding. The stranger crouched beside her. "I read it," he said softly. And it felt like someone reaching through time, like a soul trying to return. She looked at him through teary eyes. "Thank you. This means more than I can say," he smiled, then nodded toward Myra. "Is that her?" Inia looked at the kitten, curled on the porch. "No," she said, but maybe a reminder of love that refuses to die. That night, she read her journal aloud on the hill. Every word, every lost sentence, every ache. Mira listened, still and attentive. And when she closed the final page, Myra meowed. Once soft, gentle, like the whisper of a promise never truly forgotten. The moon, glowing high, seemed to shine a little. Years passed like pages turning gently in a book no one wanted to close. The village breathed in rhythm with the seasons. Children who once listened wide-eyed to Anaya's stories grew taller, wiser. Some left, some stayed. But the story of the cat who cried at the moon remained stitched into the heart of every home. Myra grew into a graceful cat, silent and observant like her predecessor. She never cried at the moon, but on full moon nights. She would sit beside Inaya on the hill, her fur glowing under the stars. And together they would remember not with tears, but with quiet gratitude. Inaya became more than a teacher, more than a returning daughter. She became a keeper of memory. People came to her not just to learn letters or stories, but to ask questions they didn't have words for. Why do we forget who we are? How do we find our way back? And she always answered gently. Sometimes we don't, but someone who loves us remembers. It's enough to guide us home. One winter night, the sky was painted a deep blue, and snow fell like feathers. Across the village, the hill, now known by the children as Luma's Hill, was blanketed in white. Inaya, wrapped in a shawl, lit a lantern and walked the old familiar path. Mira followed closely, her paws leaving tiny prints behind at the top. She cleared the snow around Luma's grave, now covered in offerings, stones, flowers, drawings from children, even tiny wooden moons carved with care. She sat and whispered, "Do you see what you've done? You became more than a story." Mira meowed softly and curled beside her. "Do you know something?" Inaya whispered. "Some nights I still wake up and expect to see her by the window. I still hear her cry. In my dreams, the wind stirred. She closed her eyes and let silence wrap around her. Then, from the trees behind her, a sound. Soft footsteps. She turned. It was Amara, older now, slower, but her presence still warm, steady. "I thought you'd be here," she said, sitting down beside her daughter. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Amara said, "She taught me something, you know." "What's that?" "That waiting is not a weakness. It's an act of love. To wait through silence, through seasons, through doubt." That's what she did. Inaya reached for her mother's hand and held it. "And I came back because of her?" Amara smiled. "And now others come back because of you." In the months that followed, people from neighboring towns began to visit. Some had heard whispers of the story. Some came looking for peace. Others searching for their own forgotten promises. A small bench was placed on the hill. Children began calling Mira the moon's keeper. And every full moon, the villagers gathered not in grief but in reflection. They brought candles and letters. They sat in silence or read aloud. Some sang. Some simply stared at the moon. And Inaya, always there, told the story, not with sorrow, but with wonder. She would begin, "There was once a cat who waited at the same place every night, crying just once at the moon. No one knew why. No one understood, until someone remembered that even forgotten promises leave echoes behind." One spring morning, years later, Inaya found herself growing tired. Not a weariness of the body, but something gentler, slowing, of the heart. Like the quiet before a peaceful sleep, she knew her time was beginning to fold. She sat Mira on her lap and said, "One day, I won't be here. But this story, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you now." Mira blinked, then nuzzled closer. Inaya took a small ribbon from her drawer, faded silver one she once tied around Luma's neck. She placed it around Mira's. And that night, as the moon rose, she left her window open and whispered her final words. "Wait for them, Myra. Someone out there needs to remember." When Ania passed away, the village mourned, but not with despair. They celebrated her. They gathered on the hill under a full moon. Children released lanterns into the sky. Elders read her journal aloud. Mira sat by her grave, silent, still glowing in the moonlight years later. A new girl came to the village, lost, tired, searching for something unnamed. She heard about the hill, the cat, the moon, and the woman who once told stories. One full moon, she climbed the hill alone. Mira was there, old now, but regal as ever. She looked at the girl and meowed just once, and the girl, without knowing why, began to cry, because something inside her had remembered something she hadn't known she'd forgotten. And so, the story began again, not as a repeat, but as a continuation, because promises made in love never truly vanish. They wait in the wind, in the stars, in the soft cry of a cat who once waited at the moon, holding the memory of someone who dared to leave and found their way back. And even now, when the world grows too loud and people forget who they were meant to be, the moon still rises, the hill still calls, and somewhere, cat still waits not for the past, but for the next heart that needs to remember.